Hello and welcome to the 22nd episode of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is, where we talk about actresses who may have come close to earning Oscar nominations but were ultimately overlooked or omitted, or for one reason or another just didn't have the votes to make it into the final lineup, discussing why they may have deserved to get in and why they ultimately didn't. Each episode has its own theme, presented as a double feature. And this week, as I've been doing with each of these A Woman Robbed over the past year or so, going through the decades, we finally reached the 2020s. So we're going to be covering two performances from this decade that didn't earn Oscar nominations. And my guest today, I am so thrilled to have back on the show. You last heard her on the main show, breaking down the 2007 Best Actress episode with me. Host of the Diva Dailies podcast, welcome back to the show, Steffi Acain.
Hello, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me back on. I am very excited to talk about these two movies and these two performances. I can't wait.
Yes, these robbed queens of the past 2 years. So I presented to my patrons here at And the Runner-Up Is a list of 15 of the most notable performances of this decade that weren't nominated, and the choices were Pamela Anderson in The Last Showgirl, Danielle Deadwyler in Till, Sydney Flanagan in Never Rarely Sometimes Always, Mia Goth in Pearl, Alana Haim in Licorice Pizza, Marianne Jean-Baptiste in Hard Truths, Nicole Kidman in Baby Girl, Lady Gaga in House of Gucci, Greta Lee in Past Lives, Natalie Portman in May December, Renata Reinsva in The Worst Person in the World, Margot Robbie in Barbie, Teyana Taylor in 1001, Tessa Thompson in Passing, and Tang Wei in Decision to Leave. A lot of great performances there, but the top vote getters were Marianne Jean-Baptiste and Natalie Portman. So it was pretty much a blowout for Marianne Jean-Baptiste, far and away the number one pick for this, which was very exciting. But then it was a close race, actually, between Natalie Portman and Alana Haim. But Natalie just managed to edge her out at the last minute. But
oh my gosh.
First, let's just talk about anything you want to discuss about 2020 so far in film, and especially with the Oscars. Just any overall thoughts on how this decade has been going with actresses and Oscars and film. Any general trends you wanted to talk about with this decade?
Yeah, it's interesting doing covering a decade that's like still we're in the middle of it. We're in the midst of it.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like an interesting time to like take a pause and look back at what's been happening so far. I feel like in terms of like the decade in film, you kind of can't talk about like anything without mentioning COVID, which is like, it's like a rough start to the decade, and it's, still pretty bleak. And I think, especially like in terms of movies, that obviously affected the way that we watched movies, and getting people back into the theatrical experience of like physically going out and watching movies. And, I think it's still like an uphill battle, clearly, to get people invested into like physically going out, especially because of like streaming. And then COVID gave way to giving people the experience of like actually watching like newer releases at home. So then when the world opens up, it's like, well, why do we have to go outside when it's going to probably be online in like 30 days? And unless it's like a big event movie like a Barbenheimer or a Wicked, it's really hard, especially for these like smaller, independent, more art house films to be seen. And I think obviously like that in turn affects which movies get paid attention to and then their awards season journey. And I think that's kind of like what happened here with these films to a certain extent. But, then on the other hand too, I don't know if it's like worth noting, but I'm just like gonna say it. Like in the 2020s, I feel like we're in this era, especially where like word of mouth indie international films that typically premiere at like film festivals and they do really, really well at film festivals, then they gain like a very passionate following post their film festival debut. Like seeing them start from there and watching them like go all the way, like obviously thinking about like Everything Everywhere All at Once is the obvious example of that, or even something like Anora at Cannes, or like The Substance, and then the international films like I'm Still Here and An Anatomy of a Fall. Like I don't know if in the previous decades we would have gotten moments like that. So I think like in terms of movies, it's interesting. And then in terms of like actresses, we're like, post 2015, 2016 Oscars so white. So the Academy tried to diversify who's in the Academy. So they have like younger voters and more women and more people of color. And perhaps the nominees may be a reflection of the Academy diversifying. We don't really know because, correlation doesn't mean causation. But like seeing in the actress nominees like Lily Gladstone and Carlos Sofia Gascon and I think, what was it, like 2020 when Andra Day and Viola Davis were nominated in the same year. Like, it's really rare for two Black women to be nominated in the same year. So I think, like, that's really exciting. The kinds of performances that we see, like Emma Stone in Poor Things, Demi Moore recently in The Substance. Don't know if that would have gotten recognition. Even, like, Kristen Stewart in Spencer, which was pretty polarizing, and I think it's still pretty polarizing. Like, that was exciting to see get in. I mean, this is the decade that gave us, like, Cate Blanchett in Tar, too, which I would say is, like, a pretty polarizing performance as well. I think in a lot of ways it actually kind of... I think in a lot of ways it kind of reminds me, or is, like, sort of related to Natalie Portman's performance in May, December. But yeah, and then, I could just like briefly keep going, but like, especially within like the past 3-ish years of the Best Actress race specifically, it's like very intense 2-horse race. It like comes down to that. Like Yeoh versus Blanchett, and like Gladstone versus Stone, and Demi Moore versus Mikey Madison. And I don't know. Right. I feel like the Michelle Yeoh win kind of was like a bit of a red herring in that, like, I think.
Interesting.
I think for a lot of us, like, especially like your listeners, like clearly we love the Oscars and we love actresses and we like follow this really intensely. But I think it like potentially led us to believe that narrative means more than it actually does. Because like when it comes down to like, especially the last 3 years, like ultimately like what really matters is if you are in a movie that is really well liked by the Academy, you probably have a higher likelihood of winning Best Actress, right?
Yeah. That's been the case the past 3 years. That is the trend. Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's, to your point, that is more the trend than what people assumed. Like you said, a bit of a red herring that, legacy and narrative mattered perhaps more often than it used to.
Yeah.
And instead, and that's what led people astray with picking Lily Gladstone or picking Demi Moore.
Right.
But then the real correlation is just they loved Everything Everywhere All at Once. They loved Poor Things more than Killers of the Flower Moon. And they obviously adored Honora, considering it won 5 Oscars. So, yeah, that is absolutely the case.
And even like the most recent group of Best Actress, like all of them were in Best Picture films, which is like rare and it's really exciting. But then it's like, ooh, what about like, the Marianne Jean-Baptiste performances? They kind of get lost. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You said a lot of good stuff there. I agree with a lot of what you said there. I mean, I've generally enjoyed this decade so far. Maybe it's not as strong for me as the 2010s per se. I guess, like you said, it's kind of difficult to have perspective because we're just in it now. But I have appreciated how the Oscars especially have been more open to performances that aren't necessarily just the standard biopics or dramatic fare that is very traditional. There are obvious like exceptions like Maestro or Naiad even, or A Complete Unknown, Elvis. Like there's always going to be kind of like a few slots for those kinds of performances, but it's also not necessarily like a guarantee for a nomination as much as it used to be, as we saw even with this past year. Like people like Angelina Jolie or even Kate Winslet playing these very compelling real life figures, they got pushed out in favor of more exciting fare, I would say. I mean, this has almost always been the case, but it's starting to matter, I think, more that, like you said, that the actor is in a film that people love, rather than it just being the Iron Lady or the Still Alice, or, you know, which could maybe speak to a certain laziness perhaps with voters, that like they're only watching the same 10 to 15 movies or so per award season, and then everything else just either gets not watched or they just don't consider it as much as they used to. But I do like that they have gotten slightly more adventurous, like this past year being a great example, seeing Demi Moore, seeing even Cynthia Erivo, which may not have happened in another decade, or certainly Carl Sofia Gascon wouldn't have happened in a previous decade. So I feel like these performances that could have been more on the bubble due to genre bias perhaps in other years, that's slightly being chipped away now. So I like that. I think there is just more of an appreciation of risk taking for actresses. Yeah. You know, as we've seen, like with these past few winners, like Mikey Madison, Emma Stone, Michelle Yeoh, honestly, even Jessica Chastain to a certain extent, where it's like these kinds of performances could just totally fall flat on their face due to just like the level of difficulty that's involved with all of them, I would say. But they each kind of found a way to, you know, sort of pull off the magic trick of making it work. And I think there's a lot of admiration for, you know, actresses who really put their neck on the line for these kinds of performances. So, yeah. And I also think, sadly, that also correlates with what we're talking about today, which that both of these performances really are for actresses really sticking their neck out to do something that could have really bombed, perhaps, if they didn't have the right approach to it. Right. And it's sad that neither of them were ultimately acknowledged or awarded for that work, I would say. So
I have an interesting question. Do you think we're in this era right now where if you are kind of like known as like this A-list star, that kind of might work against you in a way? Because I do remember like in the lead up to like this most recent Oscar race, like I remember people were like, oh my gosh, Angelina Jolie, like you gotta watch out for Maria. And, you know, Nicole Kidman, even though like Baby Girl is more on like the adventurous fare for Nicole, like a Birth or a Dogville, and those movies don't typically get recognized for Nicole. But like, you know, Nicole Kidman is like still a big name, or even like Kate Winslet in Lee. I didn't watch that, but like, you know, like a big name. Do you think like we're in this era right now where the like, if you have a big name that might work against you in some way, and we're like being a little bit more open to, I don't know, I don't want to say like lesser known people, I guess. I don't know if like that thought like makes any sense, but it was just like Demi Moore is a star, but she wasn't doing like a typical kind of performance. Like she really had to go, like you said, like out on a limb.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Like, what do you think?
I thought about that, especially like I said, with Angelina Jolie and Kate Winslet and even Amy Adams in Night Bitch, which was kind of a stretch for her as well, but weirdly didn't quite connect as much as maybe people thought it would. Yeah, I think there's just a level of discovery that I think is exciting for people, with people like Mikey Madison, and initially for Carla Sofia Gascon before all the shit happened with her later on. I think there was just like, oh my God, who is this fresh face who has such interesting screen presence? So yeah, I think there is kind of that inherent underdog factor, especially with, you know, an American Academy that is for some reason more appealing perhaps than the whole kind of, you know, the standard. I maybe it's just that we don't really value movie stars as much anymore compared to we used to.
That's a really good point.
How we used to. So maybe there is some slight correlation there. But yeah, I think it is definitely also that broadening of the Academy to become more international and younger, that there is just, it's not like you can kind of just rest on your laurels because of your star presence anymore necessarily, which is exciting, I would say. So we'll see how it goes forward from here, though.
Yeah, especially since, like, you know, I think Mikey Madison winning the most recent awards is kind of, I feel like it might potentially be a turning point where we might see, like, that generation of, like, actresses now, like, start to emerge. So
could be interesting. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Exciting.
All right. Well, I think we should get into these two performances now. Starting with, in chronological order, Natalie Portman in May December.
When this first started, I didn't know what to think. I knew that we had crossed a line, and I felt in my heart that we would cross it again. But now I think I've lost track of where the line is. Who even draws these lines? All I know is that I love you and you love me. And you gave me so much pleasure tonight. I hope I did the same for you. I'll see you Saturday.
So, we've obviously talked about Natalie Portman twice on the Best Actor series for her performances in Black Swan and Jackie, so don't need to do a big introduction here. Just to check in with where Natalie Portman's career has been since Jackie, she continued working with auteur directors in the late 2010s, including Terrence Malick on Song to Song, Alex Garland on Annihilation, Brady Corbet on Vox Lux, and Xavier Dolan in The Death and Life of John F. Donovan. None of them were, you could say, hits per se, but it was clear that she wasn't all that interested, I think, in being that kind of blockbuster star by this point in her career, and all those films are pretty big swings for her, particularly Vox Lux. She also starred in Lucy in the Sky in 2019 with Noah Hawley, also kind of a flop, but she had good reviews. But then she returned to the Marvel Cinematic Universe in 2020, or 2022, I should say, with Thor Love and Thunder, for which she kind of bulked up, and that ended up being her biggest hit in quite some time, despite the film not being very good. But all of this to say, she didn't really enter the awards conversation again until May, December in 2023, where she's working with Todd Haynes for the first time. So Natalie was actually very instrumental for this film coming together. So she was sent the script written by Sammy Birch, and she agreed to star in it and produce it as part of her production company. And she actually reached out to Todd Haynes to have him direct, having always admired his work and wanting to work with him and thinking he was the right fit for the material. And that's also how Julianne Moore got attached, because obviously she's Haynes' frequent muse. So May December is a darkly comedic psychological drama about an actress named Elizabeth Berry, played by Natalie Portman, who travels to the home of Gracie Atherton Yu, played by Julianne Moore, whose relationship with a 7th grader when Gracie was in her 30s caused a huge tabloid scandal in the 90s. So Elizabeth wants to study Gracie because she's going to be playing her in a movie. So she kind of insinuates herself into Gracie's life. So Gracie is still with the boy she had an affair with, Joe, played by Charles Melton, who's now in his 30s. They're married and about to send their kids off to college. And Elizabeth's arrival leads to a lot of tension as she prods into their lives and goes over some ethical lines, you could say, to do so. So let's talk May December and Natalie's performance. This was highly anticipated by, a lot of us in the actress-loving community and the Todd Haynes-loving community, you could say. But tell me your thoughts on the film and on Natalie Portman and her performance here.
Oh my God. I feel like I'm about ready to fly away. I'm so excited. I love this movie so much. In preparation for recording, it was like the first time I had watched it since it came out. Yep. So this is like technically like my third time watching the movie. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And oh my God, like it's so good. I love this movie so much. Todd Haynes, more like God Haynes. He's probably like my favorite director. It's not my favorite Todd Haynes, saying, like all of that saying, but it's like
it's a high standard.
Yeah, it's a high standard, but it's like still like up there. Right. I love how this movie's just so smart. Like every Todd Haynes movie, kind of like you have to really pay attention. Like this is not a quote like second screen kind of film, and perhaps like maybe Netflix was not the best place
Yeah.
Have a Todd Haynes movie.
Arguably
But
the worst place for it to end up at, honestly.
yeah,
With
yeah. Oh my
hindsight.
God.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And especially like, I think, what was it, like a couple weeks ago when that article came out about Neon really wanting May December and then they got outbid by Netflix. It's just like, oh my
Yeah.
God, like what alternate reality
What could have
we
been?
have been? Oh,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God. But yeah, I mean, like, I love this movie. It's so adult and it's so smart. And at the heart of it is like this really great trio of phenomenal performances. Like, there isn't a weak link. Like, of course, in a Todd Haynes movie, like, he's able to like get the best out of his actresses and actor. And Natalie Portman, Julianne Moore, and Charles Melton are so good. And Natalie Portman is great in this movie, and we're here to talk about Natalie, but I will say, like, Julianne Moore and Charles Melton are also honorary women robbed.
Yes,
Like,
for sure.
What? Especially, like,
Arguably
looking
more
back
so, even than Natalie.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, totally. Like, I
All
think...
due respect. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, like, if I remember correctly, like, when this movie first came out, it felt like Charles Melton, like, all attention go. Like, I think even some people were like, he's gonna win. Charles Melton is gonna win Best Supporting Actor. And I remember at the time thinking, like, that was so crazy too. Like, it would feel so wrong for like the first winning directed performance by Todd Haynes, like, to be a man. Like, that just feels like really weird. But
Yeah.
Anyways, like, Julianne Moore and Charles Melton are so good in this movie, and I think Todd Haynes is an honorary woman robbed. Justice for Carol 2015, Justice for May December 2023. I think, like, if you're a Todd Haynes fan, you just like submit that any award season journey is gonna be a bumpy one with him.
Thank you for listening to this preview of A Woman Robbed, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.